In this module, we will go over using bitmaps and procedural maps. Now, a bitmap is any image file that is mapped to your geometry. A bitmap can be a JPEG, an actual bitmap image file format, a Targa, a PNG, or any other file that your 3D application will read, any other image file. A procedural map is any map that is mathematically generated. And so this can be done within your 3D application, or some applications will have external plugins or such that will generate procedural maps for you. Now here we are in 3D Studio Max, and I'll just go ahead and hit M to bring up the material editor. And first we're going to take a look at what a procedural map is. So I'll just go ahead and select any slot, and I'll just call the name of this material checker. And with my material named, I'm going to just hop in my viewport here, and I'm going to create a box. And I'll just go ahead and assign that checker material to it. Now, the first procedural map we're going to look at is actually called a checker. So I'll go ahead and click on where it says diffuse, and I'll look in my list here, and I'll select the checker map. And with the map selected, I'll just go ahead and push the show shaded material in viewport. And now you can see the checker map on my cube here. Now this is procedural, being that I can control all the parameters and there isn't an actual image file. So for the colors, I can actually click on color 1 and I can go ahead and change it. Color 2, I can go ahead and change that too. I can also increase the tiling, and I'll set that to 4x4, and you'll see the tiling increasing on my object here. Now this box is getting mapped properly because by default, if you create a cube in 3D Studio Max, it gets automatic UVs. And so if I apply an unwrap modifier here, you can see that we've got UV shells laid out. Now I can click here on the little drop down arrow, and I can go ahead and just say map, select map number 2 checker, and that will load my checker bitmap that I'm working on here. And I can grab my UV shells and I can just scale them and move them around, and you'll see the change happening in the viewport here. I'll just go ahead and undo all those. I'll close the UV editor, and I'll just delete the UVW modifier because we're not needing that. And I'll just hop back into the material editor. Now, procedural materials are great because they're contained within the application. You've got a host of parameters that you can change, and all this gets done on the fly. The drawback to procedural materials, however, is that they do take extra time to calculate. And so the more of these that you have in your scene, the more your scene will become bogged down as resources are used to calculate these maps. Procedural maps will also take quite a bit of time to render, depending on the math that's being used and what's happening in your scene. Another procedural map we can look at is a cellular map. And I'll just go ahead and switch out the map here. And it's going to ask me to discard old map or keep old map as submap, and I'll just say discard. And now we've got our cellular map. I'll push on the show shaded material in viewport, and you'll see that it's displaying my cellular map. And so within your procedural map, you can actually load images and have a combination of both, or you can just tweak the parameters that you're giving by the map itself. And so here I am just changing the cell color and the division colors. And I can change size values and spread. And I can go ahead and play with this and get all sorts of neat effects. Another cool thing is that some procedural maps do not require UVs and will just map to your object's surface. You can also come up with really neat effects by embedding procedural maps within procedural maps. However, as I mentioned a little earlier, these are calculation intensive, and so depending on what you're doing, you might end up having slower render times or just bogging your system down. So you have to be careful when you're using these. And so what I did here was I just went through and I'm clicking on the different options for the cellular map, and I clicked chips. And now for my division colors, I can go into where it says no map, and if needs be, I could load in another map, another procedural map. And so now I've got a checker map in that slot, and this may not show up in your viewport, and so to see the actual effect at this point, we would have to just go up and hit the render button. And you can see now that I've got a checker map within my cellular map. Again, both of these are procedural, so all the parameters are controlled within the map settings itself, and I just went through and increased the tiling to 4x4, and I'll render again, and you can see the change. Now, you could achieve this with bitmaps, but you'd be loading multiple images, and you'd be adjusting the size of those images, or you'd have to tweak the UVs to get the effect that you need. With the procedural maps, you've got everything there, and it's all within the application, and you're just changing things on the fly. With bitmaps, you may have to set up masks and all that kind of stuff to get this effect. Now I'll just go ahead and reset my map material editor slot. And what I'll do is I'll just go to options or utilities, sorry, and I'll just say reset material editor slot. And I'll just grab a new material and assign it. And I'm going to go ahead and just set this back to checker. And I'll just make sure my map is being shown. And I'm going to set my tiling to 4x4. What I'll do next is I'll just go ahead and grab my cube and press W to switch to the move gizmo. I'll move it over a little bit. I'll hold shift and I'll drag and I'll clone my cube. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to assign a bitmap to my second cube here. And like I mentioned earlier, a bitmap is an image file. So what I'll do is I'll just select a new material slot. I'll assign it to my duplicate cube. I'll call this checker bitmap. And it's always really important to name your materials. That just makes your scene management a lot better, and just tracking things down and assigning things go a lot easier. So with my checker bitmap material named, and I'll push the assign to selection button again just to be sure that it's assigned, I'm going to now go and click on the diffuse slot here, and I'm going to say bitmap. And with the bitmap window that pops up, I'm just going to navigate to a drive on my computer and load a checker bitmap that I have. And I have these images shared and saved in a folder called textures. And I'll just go ahead and select my checker JPEG image, and it is now on my object. I'll go ahead and push the show shaded material in viewport, and that'll assign it. Now what I'm going to do here is I'll close the material editor. I'll hit Alt W to make the window full screen. And I'm just going to go in and zoom in on the object a bit to kind of demonstrate another difference between your procedural materials and your bitmap materials. So I'm going to go ahead and render. And now if you take a look at both my cubes, you'll notice that the resolution on my procedural material is a bit better than that on my bitmap. And this is simply because my bitmap is resolution dependent. The texture that I have, or the image that I have, is 512 by 512. And so depending on how close you get, you'll start seeing pixelation, or the image may break down a little bit. But my cube with the procedural map does not have a resolution because it's being generated mathematically. And so you can zoom all the way in and it'll always hold up. And that is a huge advantage of using procedural maps, is that you're not resolution bound. The math calculates everything that's being displayed for you. All right, this is a great place to stop, and I'll see you in the next clip.